In this lecture, we are now going to begin programming the functionality to register a user. And as I said previously, we are going to start with validation. So the first thing that we want to do here is to set up our method to be ready to handle the request, so we can inject the request object here. So we're going to inject Legato request here and then grab that into a variable. So once I did this, at the very top here, my test editor included line 4, use Legato framework request. So if your test editor is not importing that for you, you should just manually type this out. Then inside of here, we want to define our validation rules. So before we define our validation rule, let's just go back to the documentation for Legato framework. So come here and click on validation. So there are a few rules from the validation documentation here that we can actually look at. So the validation is very simple. So this is a case study of attempting to create a user. So we can declare our rules in an array like this, as shown here, and then create a validator object, passing it the request and also the rules. So let's get back again to our test editor. So let's grab this, and then you can see all of the available rules here. So for example, we want to do unique. You can see this is how we specify that this particular feed called username, the value that you enter here should not already be existing in our database. So there are other rules here. When a feed is required, this is how we specified. When we want to say alphanumeric, this is how we specified. So the username, for example, will be alphanumeric. So we just need to say alphanum. So let's go back again to our test editor. You can take your time to read up the documentation. Now right here, I want to paste the rules. So in our form, we have username, we have email, we have password, we have avatar, but avatar is not required. The user can actually leave it blank. So let's just check for the things that we want to ensure. So username, let's say a minimum of 5. It is required, maximum of 20. Should be alphanumeric, and then it should be unique to the users table. Our email is required. It should be an email, a valid email. And then we also want to say it should be unique. So the email should also be unique to the users table. So our password is required. We want a minimum of 8 characters. So let's just make this 6 so I don't want to get tired of typing. And then the last thing that we want to add here is for the reCAPTCHA. So we also want to require the reCAPTCHA. So once we include the reCAPTCHA to our form in our post request, so let's just try that out. So let's come here and then do a die and dump on request all. So we want to get all of the data that is being posted and then just dump it out. So let's come back here and then come back here. So let's just click on this, submit. So it says alt controller does not exist. So we need to run composer dump autoload to composer dump autoload. So let's just regenerate that and then show the form again. Click on submit, and here you can see that we get all of the data being posted. So the only one with a value is the token, and you can also see this feed here. So because we added the reCAPTCHA, this was going to be injected into the request. So I'm going to copy that and say we want to require that. So let's come here and then say g-reCAPTCHA. So pass in an array. And then we can say we want these to also be required. So required should be equal to true. So these are our validation rules that we have specified here right now. They're very basic. The only feed that we're not requiring is the avatar. So let me just quickly confirm with our database to see if avatar actually accepts non-values. So let's log in here. Let's come to links, then users, and then let's just empty this table for now. So truncate, then look at the structure. So our avatar, yes, so our avatar feeds accepts non-value. So we can now come back to begin writing the validation functionality. So let's come here. And then right here, we want to create a validator object. So we say validator should be equal to new validator. So we are using the Legato framework validator. If you look at the top here, you can see that my test editor imported it on line 5, Legato framework validator. So ensure that you have actually included that. So we need to pass in a minimum of 2 arguments to the constructor of the validator class. The first one will be all of the data from our request that we actually want to validate. So we just pass in request all, and then next we pass in our rules. So the next thing to do now is to come down here and then check if the validation phase. So we can then say if validator fade. So if it fade, it means that the request did not pass validation. So we can just stop here and then get all of the validation errors. So we can then say errors is equal to validator error get. So we get all of the validation errors right here, and then we can just return back the view. So we can then say return view auth/register, and then we want to compat error. So compat errors. So that's all we need to do to handle the validation. Let's just quickly test this out on the browser. So I'm going to get rid of this. And then right now, let's go to the browser. Then let's try to submit the form. So we submitted the form. You can see that it returned back to this specific form. And the reason why we don't see anything displayed here is because we are not actually displaying anything inside of our validation errors file. So right here is our validation errors file, which we have included if there are any error messages. So remember here, we are including it if the variable errors is set. So when it included it, there's actually nothing to show from the file. So what we now want to do is to say here, if there's count of errors. So remember, we already checked that the variable is set before we include this file. So it is safe for us to just say if there's count of error. So we can then say at end if. So if errors is an array, we want to create a div. So give it a class of alert, then say alert-danger. Then we can put a close button. So say button, type should be a button, class should be close, should be data-dismiss, should be equal to alert. Then we can say area label should be equal to close. So this should be close. And then inside of the button, we can now put the close icon here. So we can put that in the span. So area hidden, set this to true. Then the content should be at times. So ampersand times. And then here we want to put an h4. Give it a class called alert heading. Set the heading to be validation errors. And then right here, we want to now, let's start with the horizontal line. And then here we can now do a for loop. So we can say at for each errors as error. And then here we can say end for each. So if we get back again to the Legato documentation validation, and then go to reporting the actual validation error messages. So let's say displaying validation errors. So right here, you can see that when we use this method validator error get, it is going to return an array of array. And the reason why it returns an array of array is because each of the items that you specify in your validation rule may have their own different errors. So for example, we have username here. Username may have 3 errors or 4 errors. So it may be that the username is already existing and it is not up to the minimum required, or it is too long. So all of these errors will be grouped under the username. So that is the reason why we need to do double for each here. Otherwise, if you want to be more direct, you can get the specific validation error. So if you want to get all the error message under username, for instance, you can just say validator error as username. If it has it, then you can get all the errors that are under username. So if you want to get the first error under username, so you can use error first username. So that will give you that. But right now we want to grab all of the errors and then display them. So we just need to do one more for each loop. So right here, we're going to say for each, this time it's going to be error as the item. So this is going to be the item or the message that we want to display to the user. So here we can say end for each. And then inside of here, we want to just echo the item. So just so you don't get confused, you can name this message. So this is the actual validation message that is being returned. So this in essence will be for the actual feed. Okay, so let's again try to submit that form. Let's come back here. Let's click on submit, and right now we get our validation errors. So the username feed is required, the email feed is required, and all of that. So let's say we put something here, then click. Now it says the username must be a minimum of 5 characters. So this is how easy it is for us to implement validation. In the next lecture, we are now going to take it one step further to also verify the reCAPTCHA. So remember that we are using I'm not a robot here. So we also need to verify that. So we have successfully handled the validation errors that are within our control. Right now, we need to ask Google if this request is actually valid for the I'm not a robot. So that's what we're going to be doing in the next lecture. And you can also see that the button is a bit done here. So I'm just going to add some style to push it down a little bit. So let's just do that before we call it a day for this lecture. Let's come inside of register. Let's push the form down a little bit. So we can give this a class of margin bottom 3. So push it down to the bottom. Let's copy that and also add it to the login form. Paste it here. And then let's try to, okay, stay at the bottom, maybe because I'm using Zoom. So we'll just leave it like this for now.